Good morning, everybody. We're capping off the first 100-day week with our morning briefing. How does everybody feel? You like the morning briefings? Okay, we do too. That's why we're doing them. It's good to see all of you. I brought a friend out here today who is happy to take your questions, but first, some remarks. At 11 o'clock, President Trump will participate in a National Day of Prayer event where he will invite Americans of all faiths across the country to join him in asking for God's continued blessings over our great country. During the event, the president will sign an executive order establishing a Religious Liberty Commission. Later today, President Trump will travel to the University of Alabama to deliver a commencement address to the graduating class of 2025. Last night, we saw yet again why President Trump is our deal maker in chief. We secured a historic agreement to establish the United States-Ukraine Reconstruction Investment Fund. This is a first-of-its-kind economic partnership for the reconstruction and long-term economic success of Ukraine that the United States will greatly benefit from. This partnership represents the United States taking an economic stake in securing a free, peaceful, and sovereign future for Ukraine. This partnership establishes a fund that will receive 50% of royalties, license fees, and other similar payments from natural resource projects in Ukraine. President Trump has been clear from the beginning. He wants the killing in this brutal war to end. This agreement shows how invested the president is in securing a truly lasting peace. To mark President Trump's triumphant first 100 days in office, we've detailed all week how President Trump has been hard at work delivering on the promises he made to the American people. And yesterday, the president once again showcased why he is the most transparent and accessible president in American history when he held his fourth open press cabinet meeting. Every cabinet secretary went into great detail, explaining how their respective agencies are making life better for American families and businesses. And then the president allowed all of you to ask questions on anything you wanted afterwards. One of the main reasons President Trump won nearly 80 million votes, swept all 7 battleground states, and received a resounding mandate from the American public is because of the contrast he presented during the campaign and continues to this day. Everything in President Trump's agenda is grounded in one thing: common sense. While the Democrat Party went off the deep end and doubled down on pure craziness, President Trump pledged to restore common sense back to the United States of America. In a little more than 3 months, that's exactly what he's done. He recognized that America is a sovereign nation that cannot survive if it does not protect its territorial borders. So he secured the border in record time and ended the mass invasion of tens of millions of illegal aliens into our homeland. The president knows his top responsibility is ensuring the safety of the American people, which is why he's arresting violent illegal alien invaders in our communities who threaten our public safety. And it's unacceptable to President Trump to allow rampant waste, fraud, and abuse of Americans' precious tax dollars, which is why the president championed a historic DOGE effort that saved nearly $200 billion already. President Trump knows America is blessed with an abundance of liquid gold below our feet in the form of fossil fuels. So he ended Joe Biden's reckless war on American energy and is restoring American energy dominance to lower costs and strengthen our national security. President Trump believes Americans should be free to drive whatever car they want, so he ended Joe Biden's disastrous EV mandate and promoted true consumer choice. President Trump stood up for the Constitution's promise of colorblind equality before the law, so he terminated radical DEI preferencing and federal contracting and directed federal agencies to relentlessly combat private sector discrimination. DEI seeks to divide and pit Americans against each other based on immutable characteristics. President Trump put an end to it. In President Trump's America, individual dignity, hard work, and excellence are the only things that will determine if you get ahead. President Trump is a proud free speech champion, which is why he ended Joe Biden's trampling of free speech rights and the federal government's censorship of American speech on online platforms. The president believes college students have a right to speak their minds and go to school safely. Again, common sense. So he took bold action to protect Jewish American students from harassment by pro-Hamas radicals on their campuses. And President Trump knows that America's children are our future, and he'll never stop fighting for them. That's why he ended the radical, un-American indoctrination of children by eliminating support for divisive, radical gender ideology and equity ideology, and why the president protected parents' fundamental rights. And lastly, the president believes in fundamental biology. Isn't that something? which is why he made it the official policy of the United States government that there are only two sexes, male and female. And because men and women are biologically different, President Trump ended the unfair, demeaning practice of forcing women to compete against men in sports and having their private spaces invaded. When President Trump promised a complete restoration of America and the revolution of common sense, he meant it. And over the next 100 days, get ready for historic trade deals, budget deals, and peace deals. For more on President Trump's common sense revolution, I will turn it over to our White House Deputy Chief of Staff for Policy, Stephen Miller. Stephen, thanks for coming in today.
Thank you, Caroline. Great to be up here with you, and great to see so many familiar faces I've had a chance to get to know over a number of years as we gather this morning to continue our celebration of President Trump's unprecedented and historic first 100 days in office, what are without doubt the greatest 100 days to begin any American presidency in the history of this nation. This week you've heard about the historic actions President Trump has taken to secure our homeland, to secure our sovereignty, to secure our economy and our supply chains and our industrial base. Today you're also going to hear from me about what President Trump has done to secure our values, our culture, and our way of life from the unwavering assault from the radical left and the communists and the Democrat Party. One of the most significant crises that President Trump inherited upon taking office was the wave of racial discrimination, so-called diversity, equity, and inclusion policies that have taken over both public sector and private sector entities all across the United States of America. Perhaps the most dramatic example of this is that our air traffic controllers were being hired and promoted based on race and gender, not their ability to conduct our nation's air traffic. I would estimate that probably 90% of Americans would agree with the statement that airline safety should be based on your ability to keep, airline safety jobs should be based on your ability to keep planes landing and taking off and flying safely, not on what demographic box you check. President Trump has ended across the entire federal government all hiring, recruiting, retention, promotion, and training based on race and sex. This includes in our law enforcement agencies. So again, when we took office, even in sensitive law enforcement, national security, and intelligence agencies, we were hiring individuals not on their ability to carry a weapon, not on their ability to keep Americans safe, not on their ability to conduct sensitive intelligence operations, but based upon race and sex. And obviously, that is unacceptable. It's going to be merit-based across the whole federal government. But this wasn't just the federal government. This was the private sector, and this was also, of course, our entire university and education system. So President Trump's Department of Justice, working with other departments and agencies, have made clear that this administration is going to fully enforce Title VI, Title VII, and Title IX of our Federal Civil Rights Code. Discrimination based on race and sex is prohibited by law, and this administration will vigorously enforce that. And companies, small or large, that violate plain text of federal statutes will face appropriate financial and other penalties. This administration is not going to let our society devolve into communist, woke, DEI strangulation. We are going to have a system of merit, which is not just a social and cultural issue, it's an economic issue. When you hire, retain, and recruit based on merit, as President Trump has directed, you advance innovation, you advance growth, you advance investment, you advance job creation, you create the best and safest product for all Americans. When a citizen goes to, say, a hospital in a medical emergency, they don't care what race or sex their doctor or their nurse is. They want the best treatment they can get in that emergency. When they're flying a plane or when they're on an aircraft, they want that pilot to be the best pilot, the safest pilot, not caring what that pilot's race or sex is. This applies across the whole government. In particular, looking at our university system, this administration has opened investigations into universities across the country for violating, we talk a lot about Supreme Court rulings, universities across this country are in plain and direct violation of the Supreme Court's ruling that affirmative action, as in racial quotas and set-asides, are illegal. Students must be admitted to universities on a color-blind basis. But we have demonstrated through clear evidence that our university system, including our medical schools, and perhaps particularly our medical schools, are engaging in race-based discrimination, racial set-asides, racial quota schemes, and other efforts to evade the Supreme Court's ruling, and again, the plain text of federal statute. So universities are on notice, and universities are already facing the financial consequences of their noncompliance with federal law. The clearest example that we're all familiar with, of course, being Harvard, which is engaged in repeat, systemic, and sustained violations of federal civil rights law. Another area of civil rights law that we talk about a lot, of course, is Title IX, sex-based discrimination. And this administration ended the Biden administration's policy and the Democrat Party's policy of allowing men into women's sports, men into women's spaces. We are using every single legal and financial tool we have at President Trump's direction to make it clear that schools and universities are and will lose federal funds, as you've seen in Maine, if you allow men to invade women's sports and women's spaces. And this applies to our whole K-12 system. The Department of Justice is also coordinating with state and local law enforcement to fight child abuse in our school systems. It is child abuse to change a child's gender, particularly if you do not inform the parents. In other words, if a 5-year-old or a 6-year-old goes to school, or a 7-year-old goes to school, and the teacher tries to turn the boy into a girl or the girl into a boy, that is child abuse. And this administration is treating that as child abuse. And it is a gross violation of parental rights. This also includes the administration's message to our hospital systems that they cannot and will not be allowed to use taxpayer dollars to perform chemical castrations and sexual mutilations of children. Castration surgeries, castration drugs, sterilization treatments of children are barbaric. They violate all sound medical ethics. They are completely unwarranted. They harm children for life irreversibly. It is child torture. It is child abuse. It is medical malpractice. And so the Department of Health and Human Services, under the leadership of Bobby Kennedy, as well as the Department of Justice and other departments of this government, are making clear to our medical providers and our hospital systems that you cannot use taxpayer dollars to perform these barbaric procedures on America's children. And HHS has systematically eliminated all of the junk, fake science that was produced under the Biden administration promoting sex changes on children, promoting the idea of sterilizing children. That's been cleaned out, that's been removed, and new guidance is being issued to doctors and hospitals advising them that they cannot perform these horrifying procedures, these irreversible procedures on our nation's children. We are also making clear in our prison system, male prisoners will not be allowed into women's prisons. The Biden administration promoted prison rape by putting men into female prisons. That is obviously insane, cruel, and unacceptable. And even though the Democrat Party and Hakeem Jeffries and the Democrat media continue to fight to put men into women's prisons, this administration will not allow that. And will not allow men, as well, in our K-12 system, into women's private spaces and restrooms. We have seen horrifying example after example of young girls being sexually assaulted because school districts have allowed men into women's and girls' private spaces. This administration, President Trump, is at the forefront of protecting women and protecting girls. And nowhere is that clearer than when we are talking about fighting radical gender ideology. This administration is also fighting to get critical race theory out of our school districts. Children will be taught to love America. Children will be taught to be patriots. Children will be taught civic values for schools that want federal taxpayer funding. So as we close the Department of Education and we provide funding to states, we are going to make sure that these funds are not being used to promote communist ideology. For any nation to be successful, it cannot teach its children to hate themselves and to hate their country. So these are a few of the areas in which President Trump has fought the cancerous communist woke culture that was destroying this country, where we were led to believe that men were women, that women were men, that racial discrimination was good, that merit was bad, and that safety and physical security matter less than the feelings of liberal ideologues. The president has also fought to return the Department of Justice to its core mission of protecting public safety and locking up violent criminals, instead of using the Department of Justice to target conservatives, to target Christians, to target people of faith. The last administration cruelly and shamefully used the power of the Justice Department to go after law-abiding Americans, in particular Trump supporters, conservatives, and Christians. That persecution has ended. The Department of Justice and the FBI are back in the business of going after bad guys, of going after gangs, of going after criminals, and keeping Americans safe. Let me just conclude before taking questions by noting that when you look at the sweep of the first 100 days, every single crisis that has afflicted America for years, sometimes decades, sometimes generations, this president has fought head on. He has taken on every entrenched power structure and system all across this government, this swamp, this town. That includes, of course, the DOGE efforts to slash corrupt, wasteful government spending, graft, and corruption, and to stop billions of taxpayer dollars from going to radical left NGOs. These are left-wing nonprofits that are used to advance illegal immigration, to advance open borders, to advance gender ideology, and to advance all of this insanity that has been turning our country in the wrong direction for so many years. President Trump took head on the trade crisis afflicting this country with the destruction of our manufacturing and industrial base, the shameful betrayal of the American worker by Joe Biden and the globalists that sent all of our supply chains overseas. He took head on the catastrophe of mass, unlimited illegal immigration that was turning us into a failed third world state, and achieved the lowest level of illegal immigration in recorded history without even a close second. He took on the economic crisis afflicting this country by reopening American energy, by defeating inflation, by lowering gas prices, by ending the onslaught and reversing the onslaught of federal regulation, by reopening coal, shale, oil, natural gas, and fighting now for the largest tax cut and reform, and the largest deregulation reform, and the largest energy reform in American history. These are just some of the things that have ushered in the new golden age, along with his fight to restore the peace that we had for 4 years under the previous administration before Joe Biden sunk this planet into bloodshed and war in the Middle East, in Europe, and rising tensions in Asia. President Trump, in every area of conflict around the globe, has been fighting to restore peace, security, stability, harmony. So he inherited an economic catastrophe, a border catastrophe, a public safety catastrophe, and a cultural catastrophe. And in every case, he has reversed those catastrophes and brought America into the new golden age. So I thank you for your time, and I look forward to any questions you have.
Awesome. Thank you, Stephen. And as always, we'll start with our new media seat today. Chris Bedford from the Blaze Media. Why don't you kick us off?
Thank you very much. Stephen, what is the end goal of the China tariffs right now? Is the idea to open up the Chinese markets through a deal to a better market for exporting American goods to China, or is it a reconfiguration of global trade in a way that isolates China from free countries?
No. So China is a unique situation, obviously. The president has talked at length about what happened to us economically since China's entrance into the World Trade Organization and the trillions and trillions of dollars of trade deficits that we've racked up with China over the period of that time, and what that's meant for our national security, what that's meant for our economic security, what that's meant for our supply chains. Obviously, right now, the Secretary of the Treasury is in the process of developing a plan that will answer the questions that you're talking about, but the president's goals have been very clear on these points, which is that he is not going to allow China to continue to steal our intellectual property, to continue to illegally dump and subsidize their goods in our markets, to manipulate their currency, to rack up an unsustainable trade deficit. We need to have a trade relationship with China that does not do harm to our nation's economic and national security. And that has to be the guidepost of any objective. At the same time, tariffs will bring significant revenue into this country that will allow us to pursue our dramatic plan of tax cuts and reforms.
Awesome. Great. Bloomberg, go ahead.
Hi. First, as well, similar to that question, I'm curious, Kevin Hassett, when you see NBC this morning, he said that they were expecting some sort of news on tariffs by the end of the day. Do you have any insight into that?
I don't want to get ahead of any announcement, but I'll just reiterate that right now, countries from all over the world, because of President Trump's leadership, are desperate and dying to make trade deals with the United States. We're going to evaluate each of those deals, and President Trump is personally involved in making sure that these negotiations serve only one interest, which is the interest of the United States of America, and we'll end up with a deal in these cases where, yes, the other countries obviously will have their own demands and their own interests, but nothing will go into effect that doesn't serve the interests of America and the American people.
Thank you. Stephen, this morning GM is putting a dollar figure on how much the president's tariffs will impact the company. The CEO says tariffs will cost GM between $4 and $5 billion this year. The CEO of Ford says he can't commit to not raising prices because of tariffs. Is the administration open to doing more to give automakers relief?
The question, unfortunately, misses the entire point, which is that U.S. automakers have announced dramatic investments and expansions inside the United States. American auto plants are growing, they are expanding, they're opening new facilities, they're expanding existing facilities that are already in operation, because it is now the case that for the first time in our lives, that American cars receive preference in America's markets. The U.S. auto industry used to control the entire world. I believe the number during the heyday was that 70% of all cars in the world were made in Michigan. And now, of course, we've become a tiny fraction of the global market. And the reason for that is because the United States opened its markets to every single foreign cheater and every single foreign nation that subsidized its goods on the face of the earth, and their markets have been closed to ours. Japan closed their market to our cars, the entire EU closed their market to our cars, South Korea closed their market to our cars. All of the countries I just mentioned have tens of billions of dollars of annual trade deficits in automobiles with the United States. These are supposedly pure nations, nations that have at least a somewhat equivalent per capita GDP. So it is impossible under the terms of fair trade, if you have two nations with similar per capita GDP, to have such uneven trade flows in automobiles. What the president has done with his car tariff, we have the most desirable market in the world, is if you want to sell cars tariff-free, tax-free to our market, your plant has to operate in the United States. The only alternative to that is to have no U.S. automobile industry whatsoever, which is where this was headed, to be clear. If we stayed on this current path, within a few years, there would have been no U.S. automobile industry. And what little was left of it would have been in Mexico. Because U.S. auto companies have steadily been shifting their supply chains to Mexico, where they believe it is cheaper to make their products. In reality, it'll be cheaper to make them here because there'll be no tariff for anything made in the United States, and we'll have the cheapest energy and the best regulatory environment in the face of the earth.
But in the meantime, while manufacturing ramps up, American consumers may pay more. Do you agree?
Not on cars they won't, because again, there's now a massive economic incentive for automobile producers to expand production in the United States, and whatever they make here, there will be no tariff.
We'll go to the back row. Go ahead.
Thank you, Caroline. Today, the U.S. Chamber of Commerce released a letter to the Trump administration asking for small business tariff relief. They say that's necessary because in order to save small businesses and to stave off a recession. Stephen, is the administration considering small business tariff relief?
The relief for small businesses is going to come in the form of the largest tax cut in American history. A tax cut, by the way, that every single Democrat is planning to vote against. They're voting for a tax hike on every middle-class family of about $4,000. The president has made clear that there will be 100% expensing for investment in the United States. Companies that invest in the United States will be able to deduct 100% of that cost from their tax liability. This will be the most pro-small business tax bill in American history. And at the same time, this is what you have to understand about the plan, is as they're able to do that, as they're able to reshore those supply chains, that also means they'll pay no tariff. So you'll have the lowest tax environment, and there'll be no tariff because their production and supply chains will be in the United States.
So that's a no on tariff relief for small businesses in the short term?
It's a yes on tax relief for small businesses. And again, you only pay the tariff for products that are made outside the United States.
Edward.
Yeah, thanks. So on the rare earth mineral deal that was signed last night, when can that deal be operationalized? What's the time frame? And what kind of leverage does that give Ukraine over Russia?
I think the more important point about the Ukraine deal, and I would hopefully have an update for you soon on how quickly it can be operationalized, but we'll be moving at full speed, not only on that mineral deal, by the way, but on every mineral deal that this president has been unleashing. So we're opening up mines all across this country. We're also pursuing energy and mineral deals all over the world. Since the president issued his executive order also on deregulating coal, We've seen dramatic coal production increases already in the United States. So we're taking advantage of the trillions of dollars in coal wealth and mineral wealth that exists in the United States. We're a very mineral-rich country. But with respect to that deal, we'll move it and operationalize it as fast as we possibly can. But it's meant to pay back the United States, this is the key point, for the hundreds of billions of dollars that our taxpayers have spent subsidizing the war in Ukraine. So it is repayment to the United States, and that's one of the most important points to understand about it.
What's the leverage? Does it give? What kind of leverage does it give?
The president's goal, again, is to end the killing, to achieve a peace settlement. That remains, of course, the overriding objective.
Thank you so much, Caroline. Thank you, Stephen. for
Thank
being
you.
here. This administration has stressed the need for price transparency for things like healthcare bills and concert tickets. So why is it a political and hostile act for Amazon to display price transparency on consumer goods?
Well, I think it's the wrong way of looking at it, which is why would, first of all, that proposal is gone now, but why would Amazon, of all the different things that go into a theoretical price input, right? For example, does Amazon list the cost of California's regulations on everything made in California? Anything you make in California, you have a massive price increase because of the healthcare regulations that are unworkable in that state, because of the labor regulations that are unworkable in that state, because of the subsidies that go to illegal aliens in that state, because of all the bureaucracy. So anything being produced in California has a massive built-in price hike. So why wouldn't Amazon have a list saying if you purchase it in California instead of in Alabama, this is the premium that you pay? That you pay. This was a clear attempt by whoever proposed it originally, I don't know, because Amazon says they were never going to do it, to try to undermine our trade negotiations with China. I'll make another important point on this, which is that there's been many complaints about the fact that there are a lot of products that are sold on Amazon that are actually ripoffs of American products that are then stolen by China, and then they take our IP and they put them into products to try to undersell our manufacturers. So to the extent that we are engaged in labeling issues on Amazon, I would say that would be the most significant one to fix, is making sure we're not undercutting American consumers.
And then one on Abrego Garcia, please. The administration is reportedly inquiring about his return. Is that to check a box for compliance, or does President Trump want him back on U.S. soil, or both?
So, as Secretary Rubio said yesterday in the cabinet meeting, this administration is not going to publicly discuss the inside details of our foreign policy and negotiations with a foreign country. And in particular, we are not going to allow a district court judge to try to become the Secretary of State. Secretary Rubio is the one who, under his leadership and direction at the State Department, is managing the day-to-day relationship with El Salvador. Let's just take a moment, number one, to express our gratitude to El Salvador for agreeing to take some of the most dangerous terrorists off of America's streets and to put them into a safe environment where they cannot continue to engage in acts of terrorism or coordination with the Maduro regime. You may have seen recently an FBI assessment that was unclassified that said that the Maduro regime is using and planning to use Trinidad terrorists to carry out assassination plots on American soil. Now, very few in this room covered that. I'll let you all ask yourselves why you didn't cover it and why your editors didn't assign that story to you. Something I think you should think about on your own. But this is a earth-shattering piece of news. The Biden administration imported the terrorist army that our own FBI assesses is planning assassination strikes on American soil against critics of the Maduro regime. Those are the terrorists that President Trump is finding and apprehending that our Democrat judges and Democrat activists are trying to keep on U.S. soil. Trinidad has the same legal status as Al-Qaeda and ISIS. MS-13 has the same legal status as Al-Qaeda and ISIS. These are foreign terrorists operating on our soil. And our gratitude to El Salvador for agreeing to take custody of these terrorists is immense. With respect to the case that you mentioned, there's now even been more evidence that has been made public of this person's violent, repeated threats and assaults against his spouse. Someone who had repeated, documented human trafficking and human smuggling offenses. Somebody that has extensively documented membership in MS-13, a terrorist organization, and of course he had MS-13 tattooed on his knuckles. This is a person that was a clear and present danger to the safety of the American people. And it is a sad reflection on the state of our media and many of the outlets represented in this room that you obsessively try to shill for this MS-13 terrorist, well, no coverage occurred in your papers about any of the Americans that were raped and tortured and murdered by the illegals that Biden was importing into our country. You know, you talk about due process. The Biden administration made the decision to give extensive due process to 2 trained Nicaragua terrorists that were apprehended at the border just a couple years ago. They were 2 gentlemen. They were from Venezuela. They were members of trained Nicaragua. The Biden administration Border Patrol apprehended them and made the decision to provide them with extensive due process, put them onto a program known as supervised release, and put them on ankle monitors so that they could go through a lengthy legal, judicial determination as to whether these legal aliens who had just set foot on U.S. soil might want to live in the United States for the rest of their lives. What was the result of that decision? What was the result of that choice that was made? Those 2 men kidnapped a young girl named Jocelyn Ungary from her family. They beat her, they sexually assaulted her, they tortured her, they stripped her, they murdered her, and they dumped her body. That is what the Biden administration's policy was. Most of your papers never covered her story when it happened. To the extent that you covered it at all, it was because President Trump forced you to cover it by highlighting it repeatedly over and over again. He had to shame you into covering it. And each and every one of you that sides over and over again with these MS-13 terrorists, to the extent that you have the financial means to do so, you all choose to live in condos or homes or houses as far away from these kinds of gangbangers as you possibly can. If I offered any one of you a rent-free home with no taxes to pay in any of these gang neighborhoods, and I said your neighbors are MS-13 terrorists or Mexican mafia or Sinaloa cartel or trained Nicaragua, I couldn't pay you to live there. But yet you, with your coverage, are trying to force innocent Americans to have these people as their neighbors, and that one day their daughter may be abducted from their home and raped and murdered. So you're not going to get an ounce of sympathy from this administration or President Trump for the terrorists who've invaded our homes and our country.
Awesome. Thank you. Peter, we'll take a couple more questions.
A couple questions on Doge, of course, because that's the topic that you're here to speak about. But I want to ask you one other question about the topic of prices. We heard from the president on this just yesterday, right now, on prices and the risk that there could be some short-term, as he said, shortages. He was referring specifically to dolls. What do you tell Americans right now, Stephen, who say they can't afford to, in the president's words, be patient? Americans who voted for President Trump on his promise that he would lower prices across the board on day one.
But he did lower prices across the board on day one.
Well, grocery prices last month went up 0.4%, of course. So I mean, just across the board, not exclusively eggs.
Inflation, as you would acknowledge, is down substantially. Gas prices are down substantially. The new GDP report showed a 22% record increase in investment in the United States of America. So all of the, and don't even, egg prices, of course, which was all you guys talked about for a few days, I think are down like 80%. The reality is that we can either surrender economically to China, or we can reclaim and reshore our manufacturing base and our industrial needs. And it's not just China. In the event of any national emergency, this is the president's first duty as commander-in-chief. In the event of any national emergency, we cannot be reliant on foreign countries for steel, aluminum, energy, technology, any of the essential components that we need to keep this country running. He is fulfilling his duty as commander-in-chief that every president before him had failed to fulfill or even actively betrayed. And despite inheriting all of this, as I mentioned, inflation down, jobs up, and particularly, by the way, jobs for American workers. So for the first time, you look at these jobs reports, the government workers are going down, which artificially, of course, increased previous job totals. The employment of non-citizens is going down. The employment of American citizens is exploding. Remember, all the job gains during the Biden administration, so-called gains, on net were for foreign workers. So if you look at the stock of American workers over his whole administration, they lost jobs on net. So if you're an American worker, you lived through 4 years of a Biden depression. That was the economic reality that now that President Trump is rescuing. And again, if you make your product in America, there's no tariff. And as we develop advanced manufacturing techniques, increased AI, increased robotics. It'll be cheaper and cheaper and cheaper to manufacture in America.
But to be clear, you said that prices have gone down across the board. The president himself acknowledged that on toys you may end up paying, on dolls he was referring to, you may end up paying a little bit more right now. So in terms of
he was making the point that I think almost every American consumer agrees with. If they had a choice between and I'm a parent of young children, you had a choice between a doll from China that might have, say, lead paint in it, that is not as well constructed as a doll made in America that has a higher environmental and regulatory standard and that is made to a higher degree of quality. And those two products are both on Amazon, that yes, you probably would be willing to pay more for a better made American product, but here's the key point. With the tax cuts, the regulation cuts, the energy price decrease, and everything else that President Trump is doing to unleash this era of American prosperity and prevent the road we were on to get off that road of financial ruin and doom, means that it will be cheaper than ever to make and manufacture in America. I think that answers your question.
So I'm going to follow
one more.
Stephen, can I just... Caroline, can I ask the Doge question? Can I ask about Doge?
Peter, we just gave you 2 questions. Brian, go ahead.
Doge, but I'll wait. Thank you.
Last night, Kamala Harris delivered her first major speech after losing the election. She attacked Trump personally, attacked the policies. Any comment from the White House on that?
Well, I think it was a great reminder to the American people of just how blessed we all are that the leader sitting in the Oval Office today is President Donald Trump and not President Kamala Harris. It was a helpful reminder of just what a travesty and a tragedy that would have been. It would have been the end of America. And it gives me a chance to bring this whole thing home. If we continued on this road of radical regulation, choking off American energy, sending our supply chains to foreign countries, taxing our economy to death, pushing this cancerous woke ideology on our children, ending merit, ending scientific innovation, ending public safety, allowing, everyone goes to the stores these days, everything's locked up, criminals roam free, law-abiding citizens under the previous administration were punished while gangbangers were given red carpet treatment. Democrats, of course, are still giving gangbangers red carpet treatment. And then the border invasion. If those policies had continued, it would have been the end of the American Republic. And the only thing Americans want to hear from Kamala Harris is an apology for joining Joe Biden, and remember, she was the border czar, joining Joe Biden in aiding and abetting the invasion of our country. And we're never going to stop talking about this because what they did to this country is unforgivable. It is an eternal stain on the Democrat Party. Every day we read another story. Every day we arrest another alien they let into this country who raped a child, who beat a woman within an inch of her life, who murdered a mom, who murdered a dad, who trafficked drugs into this country, who trafficked fentanyl into this country, who are responsible for dead and slaughtered Americans. And I don't know what's broken in the Washington press corps, that none of that moves them emotionally. The only thing that gets them exercised is, do we need to have more trials for terrorist supporters? Do we need to have more trials for gangbangers? Do we need to have more trials for illegal alien invaders? Even though Congress and the Constitution clearly say that you can expel invaders and illegal aliens quickly, efficiently, and properly. This president has literally saved America, and I could not be prouder. I could not be prouder, as I know Caroline feels the same way, to come every single day to this building where we have a leader sitting in office whose first, last, and every thought is the safety, prosperity, security, and sovereignty of the citizens. That's an important word, people. Citizens of this republic. Thank you all.
Thank you, Stephen. Thank you for your time. Thank you, everyone. And just to add on the Kamala Harris point, I think I speak for everyone at the White House. We encourage Kamala Harris to continue going out and do speaking engagements. You'll hear from the president at 11 o'clock. See you guys later.
A report, the president's planning to fire Mike Waltz. You guys have a response?
Why haven't you nominated a single judge?